and welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and today is the third part of our three-part series talking about tests. Our first part, we talked about getting buy-in for tests and showing the value of tests, and we even went through an example of how to do a pandemic test because I knew I wasn't going to be able to fit it in anywhere else in these 3 days. So we had that, and in our second week, we talked about how we plan for our tests, some that need more planning than others, and hopefully over time you don't do as much planning or too very little planning, and the types of tests that are out there that you can leverage and slowly work your way through to full-scale simulations or even unannounced tests where everything goes crazy for the first hour or two, but you get your team working through it all. And we talked about how to document that because I do have an audit designation and I have worked a lot with audit in program management and project management. And if you can make audit your friend, and make sure you've covered all the bases that they want to see, you've got it made for yourself because that means the documentation you're using just meets everything that they're looking for. So we talked about the documentation, what I called the test charter or the test scope document, and containing what information needs to be in there. So that basically you're saying this is what we're going to do. And then when you're at the test side, this is what we are doing. And your executive summary, which we'll talk about in the last segment today, will be this is what we did. So what we're going to do, what we're doing, and this is what we did. Those are basically what audit is looking for, in very simplified terms. So this week, we're going to talk about, during the test and documenting all the findings. So let's start with what happens during a test. Now, I hinted at this last week, and I did bring it up a couple of times regarding making sure that no matter what test you have, as you're going through it, make sure you've got somebody documenting, any action items that come up, any issues or questions that people have. Make sure you've captured all that because you're going to need that information later on. Because if you don't answer those questions, people may think those are assumptions. They ask a question, they don't get an answer. Well, they're going to move forward on an assumption that the question they asked is correct. Their belief of the answer to that question is correct. And, assumptions aren't always true. The only assumption that will be proven correct during a disaster is that your assumptions are all incorrect. So during tests, make sure you've got, somebody doing that for you, especially when you've got, you're doing your large scale tests, like your simulations, and your big off-site tests, at third-party vendor locations, or even at your own alternate site. If your downtown Toronto location is gone and you are bringing things back up in Vancouver, or Chicago is down and you're bringing things back up in New York, you're going to want people there because you may have had people traveling, and you're going to need to make sure that everything they need is there. And what's not there, you got to capture, identify what they need. You can have observers. I've used observers before because, people could be in a room where the network is. Users are in a different room, at their laptops or desktops, performing their activities. You have your command center, where the test facilitator and usually, a visiting vice president is usually wandering around as well. So you've got people all over the place, doing different tests, just like your regular facility. You're not all sitting in one room, you're all spread out. So and that's going to happen at tests a lot of times. So you're going to want a couple of observers, somebody to sit with the users and find out what challenges they're having and capture those issues and questions and things that come up. People with the technology team, if they're rebuilding a mainframe or, loading tapes or building up the network or, the server racks and wiring everything there. Well, you're going to want people, they don't have to get involved. They don't actually have to be doing anything. And hopefully they're not getting in the way. But with a clipboard or a binder or a notepad or something, if somebody rebuilding the network says, as an idea, we should really do such and such. We should look into the possibility of doing X, Y, Z. Well, capture that. Have the observer capture that because that network person, she's going to be busy later on. and she's not going to remember, that great idea she had. But if there's an observer in that room, they can capture that, and you can go forward, and at the end of your test, you can consolidate all those observations. And those observations are going to come in handy when you start documenting all the findings, your issues that were encountered, and you start putting those together. So observationalists can also carry messages back and forth to the command center, to the test coordinator, who's sitting there, getting their updates. And if an issue comes up, well, sometimes the person rebuilding the server has an issue. They don't want to stop what they're doing and run back to the command center to tell everyone, that there's an issue with the Outlook server or something. So, the observer can actually take that information back, and pass that along to everyone. So, try to, during the test, do that. Have someone to be able to capture all that information. And depending on the size of your test as well and how long, and maybe even some, just tabletop walkthroughs where you're together for 3-4 hours and you're over lunch, make sure you schedule breaks. If it's a big, long simulation where you've got 48 hours, or even longer, I've been through those. I think if you listen to the last 2 shows, I've brought up a few examples of those where we had really long test durations. And as a consideration, the test coordinator, I also had to consider getting food on site, whether it be ordering pizzas or subs, or we went to a Chinese buffet place and basically raided everything and brought tons of food back, for, what seemed to be 50 people at sometimes, and making sure there's a pop or snacks, vegetable, healthy stuff as well, and making sure that people were taken care of. Everyone, if they're working an 8, 9, 10, or even longer hour shift, depending on what the situation calls for and where you are and what you're testing, you can't just expect people to work big long shifts with nothing. So during the test, make sure that they don't have to worry about that. You can simply, send a message around. Maybe you can get those observers, like I mentioned, to walk around saying, "Hey, everybody, we're pausing for a half hour or something. Pizza is ready in such and such a room. Everybody, grab a slice, something to drink, and just relax and chat for a little bit." And that helps with morale as well. It helps people recharge the batteries, even a half hour, or people can just walk outside for a few minutes. Instead, they could be frustrated with some of their documentation. And with documentation during the tests, make sure everyone's got a copy of their plan with them and not closed, sitting on the end of the desk saying, "Yeah, I'm following the plan." No, they're not. They're not following the plan. They need the binder open, and they need to be following through step by step to make sure. I'm sure some of you have seen some very, very detailed technology recovery plans. I know I have. I've seen a huge recovery for a mainframe, which included everything in there, logical partitions that needed to be built, and, the tape libraries that needed to be coordinated and connecting to the network, and all the servers, and, all the data that had to be associated with that. And those plans are very, very detailed. And if you have one gentleman, and I knew of one gentleman who was incredibly knowledgeable when it came to the mainframe, there were things he could do that really wouldn't be written down because he just knew it like the back of his hand. But when we got to the point of having shadowing and someone else doing his role where he was standing behind them, we started to find that, step 1, I do this, step 2, I do that, step 3, I do this. Hey, it's not working. That's because step 3 really is step 4. Step 3 is missing. There was something not there. So you need to make sure that people have these plans and they're following through. There's codes in these plans. There are some big formulas and naming conventions. So you really need to make sure that they're changed, as your technology changes and your testing, that these plans reflect that as well. So make sure that they are following the binders, because if you do have a situation where your staff, for whatever reason, can't get to the alternate location, You may need your vendor to get started. Well, if your vendor needs to get started, those plans better be detailed, and they should be able to access them to get things started until you and your staff get there to take over and then start doing what you know how to do. If they're not, they may get to, like I said, the first 2 steps, and that's it. And you're not getting there for another 3-4 hours. Well, everything comes to a grinding halt. Hopefully not, but it could. And so you want to make sure that when you're testing during the test, you are using what's documented. If there's something not documented, if you're also going through crisis management plans, or you're thinking of activities, that aren't there, then once again, use your observers, capture what's the gap, capture what's missing, and as follow-ups, identify that we're going to add this step to the business continuity plan for finance or marketing, or this manual procedure for such and such group. Okay, so make sure you are following the plans. During the test, you want to also make sure that people aren't working the long shifts. I know I mentioned, people working 8, 9, 10, or even longer. And sometimes that's just because the limitations that you have with people. And if that's the case, try and get some people to participate. If you've only got one key person and they're responsible to, let's say, I'll use the mainframe example again because I'm thinking of the same gentleman at a company I used to work for who was very knowledgeable with mainframes. Been working with them for, if I recall, 25, 30 years. So he knew them very well. He was also responsible for any production issues and things that happened with the mainframe. So when he was on site doing the testing and going through his binder and his documentation, if there was a problem in production, he had to stop and go and take care of that. So we had to identify someone who was, I won't say as knowledgeable as him on mainframe because there wasn't, but someone who had a high level of skills who could step in for him so he could go have a break during certain specific aspects. If there was something that once X system loads, it takes 5 hours to load, well, then great, have this person, this alternate person sit in for that and, send your key person off to, a hotel. You don't want them driving too far, especially if they have been working long shifts. But have alternate people if you can do it. You may not be able to do it at first, but hopefully you will be able to. And when you've gone through all of that, before you're documenting your findings, from observers, you've been writing notes and binders and your plans and identifying areas that need updating, and some action steps and follow-ups and, issues that you've encountered. Some issues you may have been able to resolve, some you can't, some may be high priority, some aren't, but once all that's done, then really, and I've seen it happen, we're finished and everyone packs up and leaves. Well, if you're at a vendor site or an alternate site or even in your own facility, you've just got a large conference room where everybody is gathered, you want to close down your test site because you never know what information may be lying around. You want to make sure that all your documentation and materials are picked up. If they need to be packaged and sent somewhere, either to an off-site storage facility, back to your home facility and location, or even just packed up and put in the back of your car, because I've seen that too. You want to make sure none of your paper is lying around. And that includes notes too, because you never know what people might have written down. I found a few that were, could pass as, sensitive materials, and all they were scribbles. So to the person who wrote it were scribbles, but at the same time, that's kind of sensitive. We should really get rid of that and make sure it's all destroyed, not just thrown in a garbage can, but shredded. And if you can't shred it wherever you are, take it with you and get it shredded. So that's all your paper files. If you've got whiteboards or chalkboards, I guess I'm dating myself there by saying chalkboards. Whiteboards, clean them off, wipe them off. If the material you need, everyone's got a smartphone these days, take a picture of it. for your records, so you have it, and then clean all the boards off. Anything that's hanging up, any notes. If you've got a phone line where you're leaving status messages, leave the last message saying this is the last message. We won't be updating this line anymore. And after a day or so, to make sure that everyone's got that, you can put it back to your regular emergency line that you may have had before. But removing all of your updates from that system. And if there are any other materials that you brought in, like tapes or printers and scanners and anything like that, pack that up and take it away as well. You may need help from a shipping company. Your vendor may be helping you with that stuff as well. And if so, make sure you get a confirmation, a written confirmation that this information is done. That this information has been taken care of. These activities have been executed. We've shipped back your printer, your fax machines, your scanners, whatever it may be. Get written confirmation, because if there comes a problem, it's not their name that's going to be in the headlines. It's going to be yours. So make sure it's all taken care of and you've got all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. So make sure, and this is an important one too, that if you are at an alternate location or you're using different machines and or vendor machines, and you've loaded up data, whether it be test data or whatever you're using, make sure it's gone. It's scrubbed from all those systems, and not just we're finished, okay, and your vendor says, yeah, we'll get rid of it. Well, no. You don't know what happens to it. You don't know who's got access to it. You don't know how long it'll take them to clean it up or what's happening with it. Make sure you do it. And if they are contracted to do that for whatever reason, again, confirmation that it's done, and find out how long it's going to take it, who's doing it, when they're doing it, where it's being done, and you want the closing record saying that this has now been done, not just a simple, verbal voicemail saying, yeah, we did what you asked and that's it. No, not going to cut it. Not in today's privacy, and security world. That's just not going to cut it. So make sure you take care of that. So that's a high level of what can happen during a test, what you should look after, focus on. And next segment, we'll start looking into capturing all the findings and the documentation, the executive summary, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And I'm Alex Fullick. You're listening to Preparing for the Unexpected. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. This is our part 3, talking about tests. And as our last segment, we talked about what we should do during tests, with observers and documenting, and giving some examples of what we need to consider during these tests. I could probably talk an entire day on just that aspect alone, having been through quite a few. But I'd probably bore you to tears with a lot of that information. So in this segment, we'll start moving towards documenting, our findings and start putting together our executive summary, which will be the very last segment today. So now we've had our test. Were we successful? Were we not successful? I come from the school of thought that if you find one issue, one problem, you're one step ahead of where you were before. Because if something had happened, you would not have known, about that issue, which could be a showstopper. You don't know until you actually identify it, right? You don't know what you don't know. So I find if you are able to identify gaps, then great. I think that's a success, and which is why I tend to use the term exercise more often, because you can't fail an exercise, but you can fail a test. And I'm sure all of us have had a few experiences like that in our time, where we have failed a test. So when we come to documenting it, basically everything ends up on the desk of the poor test facilitator or the BCM coordinator or whatever the position name is, who's now responsible to decipher some of the shorthand and scribblings of observers and notes that they probably took during status calls. And, they've got all their status reports, recordings of that were done on whiteboards where they took pictures, where mainframe recovery, was supposed to take, I'll just say 24 hours. Don't quote me. I'm not saying that's how long it should take. I'm just using that as a number. And mainframe recovery was done in 18 hours. Well, fantastic. That's the kind of information that needs to be there. The email exchange server was up in 4 hours, and it was supposed to be up in 2. Okay, we've got some work there. If that happens, there should be some related issues with that. If you've come in under your expected recovery time, as I said, we come in 18 hours instead of 24 for the mainframe recovery, you might want to capture what led to that success, because that's a real success. And it could be that the documentation this time around was much better prepared, clearer. The person who was doing it was more comfortable. They had, someone who shadowed could help them through. And it's not just them, but maybe materials they were expecting came ahead of schedule. And if they were expecting the network to come up in a certain time frame and it came up earlier than expected, you want to capture all of those successes. If you have a test and you don't encounter issues, well, you better be preparing for the unexpected, because I can guarantee there's something there. Nothing is perfect. We know that. We've all been there in our daily lives. We could be waking up to bunnies and rainbows, and on the way to work, well, there's a car accident that holds us back, and now we're late for work. So anything can happen. So anything where you have not found any issues, take a really hard look. Make sure somebody's not hiding something, and that comes down to the test facilitator or the project manager on how they're managing the test. You're putting all this information together. They know it's being documented, that you're pulling it all together, summarizing it. Some aspects will be more detailed than others, and they may be too afraid to put it down into words that they had an issue, and they might keep it to themselves. That may seem like I'm just saying that, but I've actually seen it happen, where a couple of groups did encounter issues, but they didn't want to say anything because leading up to the test and through all the planning, they were touting how well prepared they were, and they had everything in line, and they tripped. So they didn't want to seem like they had egg on their face. And if that happens, it's up to the test coordinator to, again, turn around and just say, it's still a success, guys. You were prepared. You identified things you didn't know. That's good. So no matter what happens during the test, as the project manager, the test facilitator, coordinator, BCM professional, whatever the position is that's running, and responsible for executing the test and coordinating it, keep a positive view on it. Always keep a positive view. These people are putting in a lot of extra hours, to do this. You may have traveled. They could be away from family, friends, loved ones, dual responsibilities while they're still looking after production, doing these tests. So put a positive spin on it. And when you start pulling all these observation notes, you may want to sit with each observer to make sure you understand what it is they are saying, what they've captured. They could be using their own terminology. I know I had, in one test, I had some observers, and one person who volunteered to help was the executive assistant for the vice president of technology. And she did a great job of capturing things. She used her own terminology, though, so that she understood what she was writing. And using her terminology, and she did know how to do shorthand, so there was some shorthand in there. And obviously, I'm not trained in shorthand. I had no idea what some squiggly lines and swirls meant, but they were words. So those observers, you may want to sit with each one to have a full understanding of what they see, what they know, what they were told, the issues that were put forward, or reminders to do things. you want to make sure you understand each of those, and you may find common elements in if you have four observers and they're in four different locations, but they may have switched things up, so that they don't get bored just looking at the same group all the time. There may be some items that appear in each area. They could all say that our documentation needs updating. Well, if it's appearing in the notes of four observers, then that's a key issue you're going to need to address and have a plan for, and will have to be captured in your executive summaries, or your findings document, whatever they're called. I'll talk about executive summaries and how to put these things together in the very last segment. But you want to make sure that you capture all this. And at the same time, when you're going through all of that, don't forget what you documented in your project scope or your test charter, whatever you call the document that said this is what we're going to do. If you're finding through all these notes and status notes and observational notes and items forwarded you by the testers and the users from IT and business, they're saying that we attempted to do this, it didn't work, it's an issue. Cross-reference that with your objectives and cross-reference that also with what your scope is. Because if they're telling you something that didn't work, that's great, thank you, it's still a great thing. But you don't want that item that was not identified as being in scope to suddenly say that your objectives were not met. Your objective was met, and as a bonus, we had time to do this extra item where we found a problem. So we met our objective, and as a bonus item, as appendices or something like that, you want to identify these are some of the extra things that we were able to attempt. Some may have passed, may have done really well. They gave you the expected result that you wanted, that you were seeking. Some may be items that may have been added to the scope the following year, but now you've proactively identified it ahead of time. But don't let that item turn around and say you didn't meet your objectives when that item wasn't planned to be in scope to start with. The reason I point that out is sometimes, and I've seen it happen, and I'm sure many have that are listening, throughout the globe here, that some people may test something not in scope and say that we didn't meet our objectives. And it's because they didn't test what was in scope. They're testing what they wanted to be in scope, which brings up, one, they were unfamiliar with their role, what they were supposed to test. So you need to review your awareness. And two, you want to make sure that, when you're going through your scope, that everyone understands it, before you get to the test. So don't let something that's not in scope dictate your overall results. They are a bonus. I'm not going to say they're not welcome, because they are. But the items that are in scope first must be captured and documented first and mapped back to your objectives. Otherwise, you could potentially have a list of things that were unsuccessful or were successful, but yet your scope was never completed, which would mean your objectives were not met. Or they were met, but they weren't met by using the right scope. So what was being tested? Like I said before, you want to identify what you're testing. This is what we're testing, and this is what we tested. Those three areas, that audit tends to look for. So what will happen is this is what we're going to test. This is what we tested. But, we have completely different results because we actually didn't test what we said we were going to test. So you want to review all those findings and meet with those teams to get their ideas. And that includes IT and business units, okay? And any vendors. if you had shipping, courier companies, or offsite storage vendors that participated, they may have sent. Some places have these, they call them disaster boxes, or their crisis management container or something, where all the offsite binders and materials are kept. If they're involved, talk to them. Did we follow the right process they were expecting? Is there something they messed up for us? Did they send it to the wrong location? Did they have a service level agreement that said that box would, once we asked for it, would be at a specific location in 2 hours, but it showed up in 4? You want to talk to them, find out, well, what's wrong? Are we holding this box on the wrong spot? Do we have the wrong expectations? You want to make sure everybody is on the same playing field. That also includes the DR vendor, your third-party vendor. If you're meeting with your teams and getting their perspective and your shipping companies, you also want the group that's actually housing your test, helping you put it together, giving you the facilities, especially if it's third party, and find out what went right for them, what went wrong for them. They're there to help you, at least they better be, because that's the business they're in, so they better be there to help you. You want to find out, how did things go? Were there things that you communicated to them that they misunderstood? Were there things that they had communicated to you that you didn't see, or were provided incorrectly? It works both ways. You want to build a relationship with all of these groups, internal and external, to make sure that everyone's expectations are being met. And if you've listened to a few shows, and I hope you have, during our project management one, there was with Sue Ross Baker, there was a big discussion about stakeholder management, and that's what that is. And you're managing the expectations of all the stakeholders. And when it comes to a test, you want to make sure everyone understands their part in it, where they stand, what's expected of them, and what they're expecting of you. So you have to not just throw everything in a document at the end of your test. You've got to go through this and validate that all the information is correct and map it back to your objectives. And your objectives, and I had mentioned before in a previous show that, there's going to be success criteria around it. We'll meet the objective when maybe item 1, 2, and 3 in the scope have been met. Well, if you've tested items 1, 2, and 3, regardless of if you found issues with them or not, you tested them, you identified potential gaps, you have a plan to move forward, you met the objective of testing these items and identifying any problems. You've met it, even though you identified issues. So make sure you go through all of this documentation, the written notes, the handwritten notes, your own notes, something on a whiteboard or a flip chart. If you gave status updates by phone or via email, make sure you have copies of all of those, and put them all together, validate that all the information is correct. Hopefully, it all is, and on a happy path, so to speak, that all the information is correct, it's validated, and there's nothing missing. But just be aware, sometimes there could be something missing, and you don't want that to suddenly be missing in your documentation, which is going to be our next, the last segment today, the summary document, what needs to be there and how you can put it together. You don't want something missing there, especially when somebody who had found an issue didn't communicate it because they weren't comfortable communicating it. I can guarantee they would have told their boss, and their vice president probably hears about it, or their director hears about it. You're going to go through all your validation, put your executive summary together, send it out for review or sign off or whatever your internal process is. And that VP or senior director is going to turn around and go, well, I heard about such and such. Where's that? How come that's not here? It's going to make you look, well, not good. It's going to look like you're hiding something when you're not, right? You're not doing that intentionally at all. It's just the way it worked out. So make sure you validate all the information. Now, in our next segment, the last segment today, we're going to talk about documenting the summary, how to group all of these issues that you've got, and how to present it. And so we'll be right back in a couple of minutes. I'm Alex Fullick, and this is Preparing for the Unexpected. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. This is part 3 of our talk on testing. And this is the last segment, the last piece we'll talk on testing. That doesn't mean we won't have future shows. There may be something out there people want to talk about specifically. But in this one, we're going to talk about the executive summary. In our last segment, we talked about all the information you want to capture and put together and how you can get and obtain all that information, where it's kept, whiteboards and scribbly pads and notes and, people's emails and your own status emails. Now you got to package that. Because if you've got the value, you've shown the value and the buy-in, for executives, they're going to want to see something out of it. They've probably already seen what was in scope, what was being tested. So now they know the test has been held, and I can guarantee you, before you've even said anything, before you've distributed anything to anybody, they're already well aware of what happened. So you've got to make sure your executive summary is clean, crisp, and concise. Word to the wise, don't think you're going to do a 30, 40-page executive summary. You may do a big findings document like that, but executives aren't going to look at it. Really aren't. I don't know any executives who will look at that. They'll just, I don't know what the comparison is in the United States, but in Canada, it's the Coles Notes version. Which were summaries of some of the big books, through history. They'd be 30 pages long rather than, the 400-page book. It would summarize everything for you. And that's what your executive summary is going to have to do. Clean, crisp, and concise. Something they will want to read and will easily understand. So what needs to be in there? Now, I've mentioned that you want to capture all your observations, your issues, and mapping it back to your scope, right? So I tend to group my issues in 4 categories. You're going to have, we'll just say, 12 issues altogether you had in your test. And they go into 4 categories. 1, the first category is planning. Planning identifies those issues related to the test or exercise and the BCM program planning effort. We didn't have enough meetings to start with. We didn't have the right documentation provided. We didn't understand the scope. Anything, communications, we never received updates and things like that. Anything to do with planning. Group those issues. Next is the execution. So these are the things that are identified during your test, when you're actually executing your test. Identify anything related to those activities. And I mentioned, observers may capture, something from the network guy that says we need to update XYZ document. That's where that would go. The next one is team resources. These team resource issues identify those issues related to the team members on-site performing execution activities. So this doesn't necessarily mean that, Bob did a terrible job or Jane was late 10 minutes. No, these are issues that are related to the resource. There was only one person who did this. And they had to work, 16 hours to do it because there was no alternative. Well, that's an issue. Bob isn't the issue because he worked 16 hours. Jane's not the issue because she was 10 minutes late because she was working on production activities as well. The issue is you don't have a backup for this person. So what's happening when they go away on vacation, let alone during a disaster test, right? So that's the kind of thing, that poor Bob, poor Jane, they're the single point of knowledge. And without them, things come to a halt. That's something that's going to need to be addressed. They're not the single point of contact, or single point of failure. They're the single point of knowledge. People aren't failures. Systems and processes fail. People are the single points of knowledge. And the last category, from planning, execution, team resources, is technology components. That's kind of self-explanatory. Your applications, your hardware, your networks, your cabling, anything to do, your laptops, your desktops, anything to do with those items, issues related to that, to the technology components themselves. So group your issues like that, and then identify a grade for them. If you have 4 issues in each one, like I said, the 12, so 4 planning, 4 execution, 4 team resources, and 4 issues related to technology components, grade them. Out of the 4 issues that you identified in planning, which is the key one? Which is a high priority you need to address right away? Which is medium? This is a medium priority. We can wait a little while, but as long as we take care of it over the next 6 months, let's say, and which one is low? It's a low priority. We don't need to focus on it right away, but as long as we have it addressed by the time we do our next test, that's fine. And I actually put another grade in here. If there's planning issues related to good practices, right? And good practices, they're items that can be incorporated into the program to improve things. The exercise performance, that help, things that came up. Hey, this really works really well. Almost like a lessons learned, or lessons observed, and then you implement it, and then it becomes a lessons learned. So, you have your 4 categories: planning, execution, team resources, technology, each with 4 issues, and then grade those issues: high, medium, low, or is it a best practice? Or good practice, actually. I don't like using best practice because best practice is different for every industry and every different company you deal with or consultant. Everyone's got their idea of what a best practice is. But there's good practices, and you can use what works best for you. So group them that way. I find in your first page on the executive summary, where you do your little introduction paragraph, keep it light and breezy. You don't want to get too detailed. You've already got detail in your charter. In the overview chart, what you can now put is under our planning, we had 1 high issue and 3 low issues. Execution, we had 4 medium and nothing else. Under team resources, we had 1 high issue that needs to be looked at, a medium, a low, and a good practice. And then technology components, I know every time I talk to someone about this, is almost everything in technology is high priority. So we'll for the argument's sake, we'll say 4 issues that are, high priority, need to be looked at. Now that takes up your first page. Now an executive can see, okay, these were the issues associated with planning, these were execution. On your next page, now you say what they are. And you say, this is our high issue in planning. And how you do that is you give it a number so everyone can identify this is issue number 1. It's a high priority item, and we need to look at it right away. What is the issue? Describe what the observance was, what the issue really is, not someone's interpretation of it, but what the issue really was, what the issue impacts, what did it actually do? We found this issue and it did this. It caused a delay, it caused a server to crash, it caused, something else to occur. Then the last section for that issue, you want to put, what are we going to do about it? You have if I'm an executive and I'm looking at it, okay, you have a high issue in planning. Okay, that's fine. This is what it was. Okay, that's fine. This is what it did. This is what it impacted. That's fine. Well, now what are you going to do about it? That would be my question. So what? Okay, so you found this issue, but what are you going to do about it? Right? They're not going to sit there and tell you how to fix it. So you want to come up with a recommendation to move forward. And you document that and give each issue a page. You can create a little chart again, like I said, as single point of knowledge. It falls under the item category of team resources. Has a high rating, or red, if you're using colors. It's red, so it stands out right away. And when an executive flips through the page and sees these reds, they know these are the ones I need to support the business continuity program with. Or I need to address in my own area if it's something that it is with their own area. This is what we need to address right away. So it helps them prioritize as well, not just you. Because you're helping build your program going forward. And if you have, like I said, the 12 issues, your document overall is only going to be 12 to 14 pages, right? It's not going to be the 30, 40. It's clean, it's concise, it's direct, it's right to the point. It shows your issues, what it did, and what you're going to do about it. And you got to put, if you can, put some options. This is, the options we have to resolve this issue, or mitigate it from occurring again, and put some time frames, by, in the next 3 months, we will have this addressed, or the plan updated, or, have someone identified to shadow, poor John or Jane, who were the only people in those areas. So put that together, for each issue, and you can group them all together. These are all our, our team resources, from high, medium, low to best practice, and then the next 4 pages deal with the planning ones, issues, and then the next page deals with, your technology, etc. So that's how you can capture that. I do have a template available on my website, alexfolk.com. If you go to the shop, you can have a look there. It works very well. These documents that I've mentioned over the last couple of weeks, the test charter or scope charter and the executive summary, they like it. Audit likes it. Executive likes it because they see that, this is our objective. This is what we did. We met it, and that's in your executive summary as well, right? If you've got 4 objectives, and you met them or you didn't meet them, now you're providing the information as to why you did and why you didn't. And it's real information, not simply someone's interpretation of it, but it's factual. And that's what you want to do. And of course, you let everybody look at it, make sure you've got your terminology right, you make sure you're not missing any specific details with the issues, so you let the participants have a look at it. And then you get your sign off, from your sponsor when they're happy, right? And then you move forward and you address, your issues over the next couple of, months up until the next test. And hopefully you don't encounter the same issues again the next time, or if you had a low issue and it's been addressed, it doesn't appear anymore, or you had a high one, but now it's, it kind of occurred again, but it's now got a low ranking. Okay? So you want to keep those documents. That's what audit likes, and that helps you build over time. Your testing as you go up the ladder from small tests to big simulations. And as I said, the more you do it, the less planning you should be able to do. Because everyone's going to by then know what they're supposed to do. So that's our talk on testing. I hope it's been insightful. I know I could probably do double or triple the amount of shows talking about testing because there's so much more information to go through. But I'd like everyone to have a listen, and I hope everyone picked up a couple of tips to help them. Feel free to check the website, stone-road.com or alexfolk.com, and there's some information there. And if there are other topics that you want to talk about or you'd like to talk about, if you'd like to be a guest, please send me an email, info@stone-road.com. And let's talk, let's touch base, let's find out and get you on the show and talk about what you want to talk about. It could be something you've created, could be an experience, could be your program, anything along those lines. I'm very open. This is your show. I want everything to be good for you. I want us all to be prepared for the unexpected. So thank you again for listening. This has been another great week, and we'll talk to you next week. I'm Alex Fullick. Stay prepared, everyone.
If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.